She fell for a poor painter by the lake years later. He bought back her family estate. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Tonight's story takes us back to the 1940 seconds, to a time when love was a dangerous choice and class divided hearts as sharply as war divided nations. It is a tale of a woman born into privilege, and a man who painted her world in colors she was never meant to see. Let us return now to our main character. The rain had not stopped since morning. The Brooks estate, once the crown jewel of Ashbourne County, stood cold beneath a gray sky. Inside the grand ballroom, light shimmered through crystal chandeliers, and a string quartet played something elegant but empty. Guests in silk gowns and tuxedos whispered behind champagne glasses. At the center of it all stood Eleanor Brooks, 25, elegant, calm, or at least trying to appear so. The pearls at her throat felt heavier than they should have. Tonight was supposed to be her engagement party, the one her parents had planned since she was a girl. Every eye watched her, waiting for her to smile, but she could not. When her fiancé, Charles Pembroke, lifted his glass to toast, Eleanor's hands trembled. His words echoed through the hall about status, fortune, legacy, everything except love. That was when she finally understood what her life had become. A performance she no longer believed in. The sound of her glass striking the marble floor cut through the music. Gasps rippled. She looked straight at Charles, her voice steady but soft. "Charles, I cannot do this," she said. "Not tonight. Not ever." For a heartbeat, the world froze. Her mother's face turned pale, her father's eyes darkened with fury, and the orchestra fell silent. Then came the whispers, sharp as the rain outside. She ruined everything. A Brooks scandal. Who will marry her now? Eleanor did not wait for answers. She walked out through the terrace doors, rain soaking her silk gown, mascara running down her cheeks. The night air was cold, the kind that steals your breath but gives back clarity. She stood beneath the stone archway and looked toward the lake beyond the garden. The same lake where, years ago, she had spent every afternoon with a poor young man who loved to paint. His name was Noah Carter. Back then, he was the gardener's son, quiet and sincere, with hands that smelled of turpentine and earth. He used to tell her, "One day I will paint this lake, and you will see yourself in its reflection." But that was before her mother found out, before she was forbidden to ever see him again. Now standing there in the rain, Eleanor felt the ache of memory like a pulse under her skin. Somewhere out there, Noah had become a name she whispered only in dreams. She had not heard from him in years. A voice behind her broke the silence. "Eleanor," her father said, his tone low and sharp. "You have disgraced this family. The Pembrokes have withdrawn the dowry, and the creditors will be here within the week. You have left me no choice." She turned slowly. Rain streaked down her face like tears she no longer had the strength to hide. No choice for what? "To save this family's name," he said, stepping closer, "you will marry the man who has offered to settle our debts." Her heart pounded. Who? Her father's jaw tightened. Noah Carter. For a moment she thought she had misheard him. Noah, the boy she once loved, now a man wealthy enough to buy the very estate that once employed his father. The thunder rolled as her father's words sank in. He has offered to pay off everything, his only condition 3 months of marriage. A contract, nothing more. You will agree, Eleanor. You owe this family that much. Eleanor stared past him, toward the lake glimmering faintly through the rain. She could almost see Noah there, brush in hand, painting her as he once did. But the memory no longer felt warm. It felt like fate circling back, asking her a question she was not ready to answer. She drew a slow breath. "If this is the only way to save what is left," she said, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface, "then I will sign." Her father nodded once, grimly satisfied. He turned to leave, but Eleanor remained by the open doors, the rain soaking through her gown. She whispered to the empty night, "Noah Carter, what have you become?" Far away, in a quiet art gallery in New York, a man stood before a canvas titled "The Lake at Dusk." He stared at the unfinished face of a woman he had once loved and said softly to himself, "Let us find out." The next morning arrived pale and heavy, the kind of morning that seemed to carry the weight of all that had gone wrong the night before. The newspapers had already printed her name in bold letters. "Heiress cancels engagement. Brooks' fortune on the brink. Eleanor sat in her father's study, the scent of cigar smoke and old paper thick in the air. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. Across from her, her father shuffled through documents until he found what he was looking for, a contract bound in a black leather folder. "This," he said, sliding it across the desk, "will save us." Eleanor stared at it. Her name was already printed beside another, Noah Carter. Beneath it, the words, "Marriage Agreement, 3 months duration." She looked up at her father, disbelief in her voice. "You spoke to him already?" He nodded, refusing to meet her eyes. "He contacted me. Said he would clear every debt, pay the estate taxes, and even restore the property. But only if you sign and honor the terms." "What are the terms?" He hesitated before replying. "You will live with him here, at Brooks Manor, as husband and wife in the eyes of society. You will attend public events together, and after 3 months you will part ways discreetly." Eleanor's throat tightened. And why would he do this? "Because he can," her father said, his tone bitter. "Because men like him do not forget how they were treated." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Finally, Eleanor reached for the pen. Her hand trembled, but she signed. Later that afternoon, when the rain finally eased, a black car pulled into the gravel drive. Eleanor stood at the top of the staircase as the butler opened the door. Noah Carter stepped inside. He looked nothing like the boy she remembered. The shy gardener's son was gone. In his place stood a man whose presence filled the room, tall, composed, his dark hair neatly combed back, a trace of paint still on his fingers. His suit was simple but perfectly tailored. His eyes, once soft and curious, were now unreadable. "Miss Brooks," he said, inclining his head slightly. Her heart clenched at the distance in his tone. "Mr. Carter." Her father motioned them toward the sitting room, but the air between them was already taut. When they were finally alone, Noah set the folder on the coffee table and opened it. "I believe you have already read this," he said. "I have added one clause of my own." Eleanor frowned. "What clause?" He turned the paper toward her. The handwriting was unmistakably his. "No discussion of our past relationship. No expression of affection, real or imagined. This marriage is strictly a transaction." Eleanor met his eyes. "You made sure to include everything that could keep me from remembering who we used to be." "I made sure," he said quietly, "that you would not mistake this for what it once was." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain had stopped, but the wind outside pressed against the windows like a restless spirit. Finally, Noah drew a small key from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "This is for the north wing," he said. "It used to be your studio. It has been restored. You may use it as you wish." Eleanor stared at the key, recognizing the worn edges. It was the same key she had once given him years ago when he used to paint there in secret. Her fingers brushed against it before she pulled her hand away. "Why return this to me?" He looked at her for the first time with something that resembled emotion. "Because some doors should never stay locked forever." That night, Eleanor moved back into the house she once called home, though every corner felt changed. The portraits of her ancestors stared down from the walls as if judging her. The servants whispered, unsure of how to address her, Mrs. Carter or Miss Brooks. She wandered through the halls until she reached the north wing. The air smelled faintly of turpentine and cedar. On the easel stood a single canvas, covered with a cloth. When she pulled it away, her breath caught. It was the unfinished portrait he had started years ago, her sitting by the lake, sunlight in her hair. He had never completed her face. Footsteps approached behind her. "You kept it," she whispered. "I do not throw away things that still have meaning," he said, his voice low. "Good night, Eleanor." When he left, the echo of his footsteps lingered in the silence. She turned back to the painting, her heart heavy with something she could not yet name. For the first time in years, she felt both trapped and free, bound by a contract, but tethered again to the only man she had ever truly loved. Days turned into weeks inside the Brooks estate, and silence became their unspoken companion. The contract was signed, the debt was cleared, and the world believed in their sudden marriage. Newspapers called it a union of mercy, while the social elite whispered that the heiress had sold her name to survive. Eleanor ignored them all, but every rumor cut like glass. Noah kept his distance. He occupied the art studio by day and worked late into the night. When they met in the hallways or at dinner, his politeness was flawless, his tone steady, his words measured. It was as if they lived in the same house but on opposite sides of a dream. At dinner one evening, the silver clink of utensils filled the long table. Candlelight flickered between them. Eleanor finally broke the silence. "You do not speak much," she said softly. Noah's fork paused mid-air. "There is not much to say." "You used to talk about everything," she replied. "The sky, the color of light on water, the smell of paint." He interrupted gently. "That was a long time ago. Yokont," she nodded, pressing her napkin to her lap. "I suppose the contract does not require conversation." Noah looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a fleeting second, something in his expression faltered, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "No," he said quietly, "it does not." After dinner, she wandered through the garden alone. The moonlight rippled across the lake like spilled silver. She could still remember when Noah used to paint there, barefoot in the grass, his laughter carried by the wind. That boy had vanished. This man was a stranger with his face. Inside the house, Noah watched her from the balcony above. He did not move or speak, but his hand tightened around the rail until his knuckles turned white. The memory of her leaving him years ago had never faded. Her mother's words still echoed in his mind. "Love does not feed you, boy. Leave before you ruin her." He had left, but not before promising himself that one day she would see him as more than the gardener's son. The next morning brought visitors. A letter had arrived from the city's art guild, inviting Noah and his new wife to the upcoming charity exhibition. He showed it to Eleanor across the breakfast table. "They expect us to appear together," he said. "It will silence the rumors." She hesitated. "If you wish." "It is not about what I wish," he replied. "It is about what we agreed to." Lo 1. The evening of the exhibition came quickly. Eleanor dressed in a simple ivory gown, elegant but understated. When she entered the foyer, Noah was waiting in a dark gray suit. For a brief moment, their eyes met two ghosts caught between what was and what might have been. The ballroom downtown glowed with chandeliers and murmurs of wealth. Cameras flashed as they arrived arm in arm. The whispers began instantly. "She married the help. He must have bought her out." Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to let them see the sting. When a well-known patron approached and smirked, "Mr. Carter, is it true you used to mow her family's lawn?" Noah opened his mouth to respond, but Eleanor stepped forward. Her smile was calm, her voice clear. "Yes," she said. "And now he paints portraits that hang in museums while those who mock him can barely hang their own pride." The crowd fell silent. Noah turned toward her, startled. For the first time in years, he saw the woman he once adored, the one who never bowed to anyone. Later, when the lights dimmed and the orchestra began to play, Noah found her standing alone near a window. "You did not have to defend me," he said quietly. Eleanor smiled faintly. "I was not defending you. I was reminding them who they were speaking to." His lips curved just slightly. "You have not changed." "And you have," she said. "Too much." He exhaled, looking out toward the city lights. "Change was all I had left." That night, back at the estate, Eleanor paused outside his studio door. She could hear the soft sound of a brush against canvas, the rhythmic scrape of bristles on paint. She wanted to knock but stopped herself. Through the thin crack of the door, she saw him painting the same unfinished portrait, her face still blurred, as if he could not bring himself to complete it. Her voice barely above a whisper, she said to the empty hallway, "Finish it, Noah. Please finish it." Inside he froze, the brush trembling in his hand. For a long moment, he stood there, staring at the canvas. Then, slowly, he dipped the brush into color again. In that quiet hour before dawn, the distance between them began to bend, small, fragile, but real. And though neither spoke it aloud, both of them felt the same unspoken truth. The contract might bind their names, but love was beginning to reclaim their hearts. The weeks that followed the charity exhibition moved quietly, like ripples across still water. Outside, spring began to soften the air, and the gardens around the Brooks estate came alive again. Inside, however, the atmosphere between Eleanor and Noah remained a careful balance between civility and something neither of them dared to name. Each morning, she heard the faint hum of the studio upstairs. He painted before breakfast, the smell of oil and varnish drifting down the hall. She began to leave small things outside his door, a vase of wildflowers, a cup of black coffee, sometimes a folded note that said nothing more than good morning. He never responded, but she noticed the empty cup returned each time. It was not forgiveness, but it was something. One afternoon, she entered the studio for the first time since their wedding. Light poured through the tall windows, falling across half-finished canvases that lined the walls. Landscapes, portraits, fragments of memory. She paused in front of one painting, a view of the lake at dusk, just as she remembered it from years ago. Noah looked up from his easel. You should not be in here." "Then why leave the door unlocked?" she asked, smiling faintly. He said nothing. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, streaks of blue and gold on his hands. He looked older in the light, not from age but from the weight of years lived alone. "I used to sit there," she said, nodding toward the stool by the window. "I remember," he replied quietly. "You used to talk while I painted. You said silence made you nervous. Does it still bother you?" He shook his head. "No, I learned to live with it." They stood there in the shared quiet, the kind that did not hurt anymore. Then she noticed a small box on the table. Inside was a ring plain gold, delicate, nothing like the diamond she had worn before. "It is part of the contract," he said, sensing her question. "A symbol for the public." "Usson." Eleanor slipped it onto her finger. "Then, let us make it look convincing." The next evening they attended a dinner hosted by the city's art guild. The guests welcomed Noah with cautious admiration, yet their eyes always drifted toward Eleanor, searching for weakness. When one of the patrons mentioned her broken engagement, she smiled gracefully and said, "It is strange how losing everything can sometimes show you what truly matters." 2. Later, as they returned home, the night air carried the faint scent of lilac. Eleanor turned to Noah as they climbed the steps to the porch. "You never told me why you came back?" "I did not," he said, pausing. "I built a life in Paris. I was doing well, but every painting I finished felt incomplete. I thought success would cure me of the past. It did not." Her voice softened. "And buying this house, marrying me, was that your cure?" His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "I wanted closure." She smiled sadly. "So did I." That night she could not sleep. She walked to the window, watching the moonlight scatter across the lake. The water shimmered with the same reflection he once tried to paint. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Noah stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. "You should rest," he said. "I tried," she answered. "It seems I have too many memories." He handed her a cup and joined her by the window. They stood there in silence, steam rising between them. After a long moment, she whispered, "Do you ever think about what might have been?" He gave a quiet laugh, weary but honest. "Every day." A gust of wind pushed the window open slightly, and the curtains swayed. Eleanor turned to face him. In the dim light, she could see the faint shadow of paint on his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes, and the longing he was trying so hard to hide. Without thinking, she reached up and touched his face, her fingertips brushing the color from his skin. "You still smell like turpentine," she said. He caught her wrist gently, his breath unsteady. "And you still know how to make everything feel impossible." For the first time, their defenses cracked. The room grew quiet, except for the rain beginning to fall outside. It started as a whisper, then built into a steady rhythm against the glass. Neither of them moved away. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Noah, if all of this ended tomorrow, if the contract disappeared, would you still want me here?" He hesitated, eyes searching hers. "I would want the truth," he said softly, "whatever it costs." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, the silence that followed was not the same kind of silence that once divided them. It was the kind that hinted something fragile, something real, was beginning to take its place. That night, as the storm raged over the lake, Eleanor realized she no longer cared what the contract said. The paper on her father's desk might have bound her name, but her heart had already decided otherwise. The morning after the storm carried a strange calm over the estate. The air smelled of wet earth and lilac blossoms. The house was quiet, except for the steady rhythm of brushes moving on canvas. Noah had been painting since dawn. When Eleanor appeared at the studio door, he did not look up. "You start early," she said, her voice soft. "I could not sleep," he answered. She stepped closer. "Neither could I." On the easel stood a new canvas. It was the lake again. But this time he had added 2 figures, tiny, distant silhouettes walking along the water's edge. She knew without asking who they were. Before she could speak, the butler appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Carter, a letter from the New York Guild," he said, handing Noah a sealed envelope. Noah read it once, his jaw tightening. "They are holding a private review next week," he said. "They want me to attend." Eleanor studied his face. "Is that not good news?" "It should be," he replied, folding the letter. "But I suspect it is about the rumors. Some of the patrons believe our marriage is a fabrication." She hesitated. "What will you tell them?" "The truth," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The following days passed with quiet tension. Eleanor tried to keep busy walking the garden paths, writing letters she never sent, staring at the portrait in the studio that he refused to finish. At night, she could hear him pacing in the hall, stopping outside her door, then turning away. One evening, he found her in the library, a book open but unread in her lap. The fire burned low, shadows flickering across her face. "You do not need to attend the review," he said. She looked up. "And leave you to fight their gossip alone? This is not your battle." "Yes, it is," she replied. "If they want proof, let them see that I am not ashamed to stand beside you." For a moment, his expression softened, but pride quickly replaced it. "Eleanor, appearances are what ruined us once. I will not let them do it again." Ho. The next week, they traveled to New York together. The city hummed with post-war energy, streets crowded with taxis, men in gray suits, women in hats that glimmered under the streetlights. At the gallery, the walls were lined with paintings worth more than most houses. Yet as they entered, conversation quieted. All eyes turned toward them. The head of the guild, Mr. Langley, approached with a rehearsed smile. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter," he greeted. "Quite the sensation, your marriage. Some of our donors have expressed curiosity." Eleanor met his gaze coolly. "Curiosity is healthy," she said. "It means people are still capable of wonder." Langley's smile faltered, but he led them inside. On the far wall hung Noah's latest work by the lake. The same painting she had glimpsed unfinished in his studio, now complete. Two figures stood in the reflection of twilight, hand in hand. The sight took her breath away. As the guests gathered, a woman in pearls whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "It is touching, really. He paints his employers, then marries one." Laughter rippled. Noah's eyes darkened, but before he could respond, Eleanor stepped forward. "You are right," she said, her voice clear. "He did paint me. But what he captured was not my wealth, nor my name. It was my soul. That is something money cannot buy." The room fell silent. The woman's smile vanished. Cameras flashed. For the first time that evening, Noah looked at Eleanor not with distance but with something close to pride. When the evening ended, they rode back to the hotel in silence. Rain streaked across the windows, blurring the city lights. Finally, Noah spoke. "You did not have to say that." She turned to him. "I wanted to." He exhaled slowly. "You have changed." She smiled faintly. "So have you." He hesitated, his voice almost a whisper. "Eleanor, when this contract ends," she interrupted gently. "Do not finish that thought. Not yet." The car rolled through the dark streets toward the station. Outside, the rain kept falling soft, steady, endless. Inside, for the first time, they sat close enough that their hands brushed and neither of them moved away. Something had shifted. The agreement that once felt like a wall between them had become the fragile bridge holding them together. And though neither dared to call it love again, both knew it was becoming something that would be far harder to let go. When they returned to the estate, the air carried the scent of approaching summer. The gardens had grown wild in their absence, roses spilling over the stone walls, the lake glimmering beneath a pale evening sky. Everything looked alive again, yet inside the house there was a quiet uncertainty, as if both of them were waiting for something neither dared to name. Noah spent his days in the studio, painting furiously, as though time were running out. The walls were covered with sketches and unfinished canvases, waves, trees, glimpses of Eleanor's face from different angles. He spoke little, ate little, and sometimes worked until dawn. Eleanor tried to keep her distance, but her heart betrayed her. Every time she passed the studio, she slowed her steps, listening to the faint scrape of brushes and the clinking of glass jars. She wanted to knock, to tell him that she saw the change in his eyes, that she felt it too. But the contract still lingered like a shadow between them. One evening, she found him asleep in a chair, his head tilted back, his shirt flecked with paint. A lamp burned low beside him. On the easel before him was another portrait, her again, but different, softer, unfinished. She stood there for a long moment, then quietly covered him with a blanket. When he stirred, his voice was rough from sleep. "You should not be here." "And yet I am," she said. He looked at her, weary and unguarded. "Every time I close my eyes, I see the day you left. I try to paint something else, but it always becomes you." She took a slow breath. "I left because I was told I would ruin your future." "You did not ruin it," he replied. "You became it." For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, a night breeze rustled through the open window. Then, quietly, she asked, "Why finish that painting now?" His eyes softened. "Because for the first time, I think I finally know who you are." The next morning, the world intruded again. A black car arrived at the gate, stirring dust on the long driveway. The man who stepped out wore a fine coat and a smug smile. Charles Pembroke. Herr Fiangs. He was polite when the butler announced him, but his eyes gleamed with mischief. Eleanor, he said, bowing slightly. You have been difficult to reach. I see married life suits you. Noah stood beside her, his posture calm but his expression unreadable. State your business, Mr. Pembroke. Charles smiled thinly. Only a friendly visit. The city is buzzing with rumors, you know. A marriage of convenience, they say. A contract, perhaps? I wonder what your dear patrons would think if they saw the papers. Eleanor's heart tightened. What are you talking about? Oh, come now, Charles said, pulling a folded document from his coat pocket. Surely you did not think secrets stay buried forever? Noah's eyes darkened. Where did you get that? Does it matter? Charles shrugged. The truth has value, Mr. Carter, especially to those who invest in reputations. Eleanor stepped forward, anger trembling in her voice. You would destroy me for revenge? Charles smiled. Not destroy, my dear. Merely remind the world of what you are. Noah took a step closer, his voice low and sharp. Get out. Or what? Charles asked, still smirking. In one swift motion, Noah seized the contract from his hand and tore it in half. The pieces fell like snow between them. There, he said, now there is nothing left for you to sell. Charles laughed, but his confidence faltered. You will regret that, he hissed, before storming out. When the sound of his car faded, Eleanor turned to Noah. What have you done? He looked at her with a strange calm. I ended it. The contract, the bargain, all of it. You are free now. Her voice shook. And what about you? He smiled faintly. Freedom cuts both ways. That night, Eleanor stood alone by the lake, the wind cold against her skin. The torn pieces of paper still lay on the study floor, proof that everything binding them was gone. And yet, for the first time, she felt something that was not fear or duty. She realized she was not afraid of losing him anymore, only of never telling him how much she still loved him. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains, falling across the torn pages still scattered on the study floor. The contract was gone, shredded into fragments of paper and ink. What had once bound them in duty was now only dust. Eleanor woke to the sound of voices in the hallway. The butler's tone was urgent, and Noah's voice carried the edge of anger. She slipped on her robe and stepped out. They published it, the butler said, handing Noah a newspaper. His hands trembled. Mr. Pembroke must have taken a copy. Noah unfolded the front page. There it was in bold type. The heiress who sold her name. A marriage built on a contract. Beneath it, a grainy photograph of Eleanor, leaving the gallery arm in arm with him. The story accused them both of fraud, calling their marriage an elaborate performance to conceal bankruptcy. Gooding tall. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. My father's name. My mother's reputation. Noah crumpled the paper in his hand. I will fix this. How? She asked, her voice shaking. They have already decided who I am. Then let me show them who we are, he said quietly. That afternoon, reporters gathered outside the gates. Flashbulbs popped like lightning whenever anyone moved behind the curtains. By evening, the investors who funded Noah's upcoming exhibition had withdrawn their support. His membership in the guild was under review. Still, he remained calm. He stood in the foyer, straightening his cuffs, ready to face them all. I will tell the truth, he said. Eleanor touched his arm. If you do, they will destroy you. He looked at her with quiet determination. They already have. The following day, Noah held a small press gathering at the estate. The reporters filled the ballroom where her canceled engagement had once taken place. Cameras clicked as he stepped up to the grand piano, his voice steady but low. Many years ago, I was the gardener's son. I fell in love with the daughter of this house. When her family fell, I returned to help, not to humiliate her, but to honor what she once gave me. Faith when I had nothing. The room murmured. Eleanor stood behind him, hands clasped. He continued. The marriage was a contract, yes, but love is not a line written on paper. It is what we do when the ink fades. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a reporter asked, And what is it you intend to do now, Mr. Carter? Noah smiled faintly. I intend to keep painting. The next morning, he was gone. The servant said he left before dawn, taking only a suitcase and a small wooden box that once held his brushes. On the table in the studio lay a letter addressed to her. Eleanor read it by the window, her hands trembling. Eleanor, if I stay, I will only bring more scandal. I can rebuild my name elsewhere, but I cannot rebuild yours. This house was your cage once, and I refuse to be the lock that keeps you in it. You said you feared what would happen if the contract ended. Now we will both find out. Noah. She pressed the letter to her chest, unable to breathe. Outside, the lake shimmered under the morning light, calm and indifferent. For the first time in months, the house felt truly empty. Days passed, then weeks. The newspapers moved on to other stories. The scandal faded, but the ache remained. Eleanor wandered through the rooms in silence, stopping often in the studio. His scent still lingered, the faint mix of paint, cedar, and rain. On the easel stood one final canvas, covered by a sheet. When she lifted it, she gasped. It was her standing on the terrace, looking out toward the lake. But this time, she was not alone. In the reflection on the water, a shadowed figure stood beside her. Tears blurred her vision. Beneath the painting, in his handwriting, were 4 words. "Some doors stay open." Eleanor sank to her knees. For the first time since his departure, she whispered his name aloud. That night, she lit a lamp and wrote her own letter, the words simple and certain. "If you meant what you painted, then come back when you are ready. The door will be open." She placed it inside the empty frame where his portrait once hung. Then she turned off the light and faced the quiet of the house, knowing that sometimes love does not vanish when it breaks, it simply waits to be found again. A full year passed before the estate saw color again. The garden bloomed wildly that spring, as if nature had conspired to heal what people had broken. The newspapers had long stopped whispering the Brooks name. The world had moved on, but Eleanor had not. She kept the house running, opened the library to local students, and hosted small art gatherings in the ballroom where her life had once collapsed. Every morning she visited the studio. She never moved his brushes, never touched the easel. The painting of her and the shadowed figure remained exactly as he had left it. Some days she talked to it, softly, as though he might answer. That summer, a letter arrived from the city. The handwriting stopped her heart. "Mrs. Carter," it read, "there will be a charity auction held next month by the Guild. One of the featured pieces is titled 'By the Lake.' It is said to be the final work of Noah Carter. You may wish to attend." Her hands shook as she folded the letter. The title was the same as the painting he had once promised to finish, the one he had never shown anyone. When the day came, she took the early train to New York. The city was bright, loud, alive. She walked into the grand hall of the auction house, her heart pounding with every step. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, collectors and critics mingling beneath crystal lights. On the main platform, a large canvas stood covered by a white cloth. The auctioneer's voice rose above the noise. "Our final piece this evening. By the Lake, by Noah Carter, donated anonymously to fund the Brooks Carter Foundation for Artists." The cloth was pulled away, and the crowd fell silent. The painting captured the same lake she had known all her life, but not as she remembered it. The water shimmered with evening light, and on the shore stood 2 figures, one woman in ivory, one man in gray, holding hands as the wind moved around them. It was the moment they first met again, transformed into art. Her breath caught. On the lower corner of the frame, a note was carved into the wood. "To the one who taught me that love is not measured by status, but by courage." Bidding began immediately, voices calling out numbers in rapid succession. Eleanor listened without moving. She could not compete with their wealth, but when the price reached a number that silenced the room, the auctioneer's gavel froze mid-air. From the back of the hall, a calm voice spoke. $1 million. Every head turned. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, removing his hat. His hair had a touch of gray now, but his eyes were unmistakable. Noah Carter. For a moment, Eleanor could not breathe. The crowd erupted in whispers. The auctioneer, stunned, asked, "Mr. Carter, you are the artist. Are you certain you wish to buy your own work?" Noah smiled faintly. "I am not buying the painting," he said. "I am buying back the promise behind it." The gavel struck once. Sold. Eleanor stood frozen as he crossed the floor toward her. The years of silence between them dissolved in that moment. He stopped just a breath away. "I kept your letter," he said quietly. "You told me the door would be open." She swallowed hard. "It still is." He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a folded paper, their torn contract, now taped together. Across the bottom, in his handwriting, was one line. This time, no conditions. The hall around them erupted in applause, though neither seemed to hear it. She took his hand, the same hand that had once held a brush, and painted her into eternity. As flashbulbs popped and reporters shouted questions, Noah turned to the crowd. "This painting is not for sale. It belongs to the woman who taught me what love costs, and why it is always worth the price." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You came back," she whispered. He smiled softly. "I never really left." That night they left the city together, driving back toward the lake under a quiet moon. The car window was open, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain and paint. For the first time in years, neither of them said a word, because silence no longer meant distance, it meant peace. Dawn broke softly over the Brooks estate, spreading a pale gold light across the lake. Mist drifted above the water, curling like breath from a sleeping world. The car stopped at the end of the gravel path, and Eleanor stepped out first. Her heels sank into the damp earth, but she did not mind. Noah followed, carrying the painting wrapped carefully in linen. For a long moment, they stood together in silence, watching the morning rise over the place where everything had begun. The house had aged gently, vines climbing higher up the stone walls, the garden blooming wild with color. Yet somehow, it still felt like home. Eleanor turned toward him. "It looks smaller now," she said. He smiled faintly. "Or maybe we finally grew up." Inside, the rooms felt different. Not haunted, not empty, just waiting. Dust motes shimmered in the shafts of light from the tall windows. In the grand hall, the same space that had once hosted her engagement party, Noah set the painting down. Together, they removed the linen covering. The image of the lake glowed in the sunlight. The two figures, hand in hand, seemed almost alive. He placed his signature beneath the carving and turned to her. "I want this to stay here," he said, "not as a reminder of what we lost, but of what we found." "Argo." Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening. "And what exactly did we find?" He reached for her hand. "That love cannot be arranged, or bought, or bound by paper. It can only be chosen every single day." Outside, the foundation's workers were arriving, preparing for the grand reopening. The old estate was now officially registered as the Brooks Carter Foundation for Artists. It would become a sanctuary for painters, writers, and dreamers who could not afford the luxury of belief. When the first guests arrived that afternoon, they found Eleanor and Noah greeting them side by side. He wore his simple gray suit, she her ivory dress, and together they looked as though time itself had folded around them. Reporters gathered at the gate again, cameras flashing, but this time the headlines told a different story. Heiress and artist transform family estate into haven for creativity. Later, as the sun began to set, they walked down to the lake. The surface mirrored the sky, the same silver-blue reflection that had once brought them together. The wind stirred the reeds along the shore. Eleanor knelt to touch the water. "Do you ever think about how much we had to lose to find this peace?" He crouched beside her. "I think we had to lose everything that was false before we could keep what was real." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "So what happens now?" He looked out at the horizon. "Now, we paint. Arjo." The words were simple, but in them lived a quiet promise. The same promise that had survived pride, distance, and time. As they stood there, the bell of the nearby chapel began to ring, signaling the evening hour. The sound rolled across the valley like a blessing. Eleanor took his hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "We began with a contract," she said, "but we end with a vow." He turned to her, eyes shining with warmth. "And this time," he said, "there are no terms, no clauses, and no expiration." The last rays of sunlight spilled across the water, turning it to gold. Their reflections shimmered side by side, two figures forever joined in the place where it had all started. And as the day faded into twilight, the estate lights flickered on, illuminating the sign by the gate, Brooks Carter Foundation, where art begins and love never ends.